Okay, next news story of the week. Oh, this is an interesting thing. We have not one, but two developers who have created native Steam Deck versions of their existing games. Now,
Native
back in the
Steam
day,
Deck.
native Steam Deck, yes, it's pretty awesome. Now, back in the day when it was first announced, it was like, oh, wow, all of these PC games are going to be going through Proton compatibility layers. There will be problems with that, etc., etc. Except it turned out that Proton turned out to be pretty awesome
Yeah, it
to the
did.
point where, nobody really felt the need for doing native Linux games specifically for the Steam Deck. And yet today we have not one but two. The first one which came to light was a native Steam Deck version of Baldur's Gate 3, which was apparently driven by an individual within Larian who just wanted to be able to play Baldur's Gate in a much better state. The second one is Kronos, the recent game from Bloober Studio. And I can't say that I've done exhaustive testing of both of those games, but I did test them. And you can test them because both of them side by side, as we're doing here, simply because, you just go to the properties of each game. It will by default load in the native Linux version of the game, and but you can just sort of swap back to Proton, and it will go back to the standard version, the standard Windows version, which goes through the compatibility layer. I'm going to talk about Baldur's Gate 3 first because, the results here I think are really, really good. It sort of stands up everything that Larian was saying about it. If we look at the right here, you can see, first of all, there's two tests here. This one is kind of like Alex's benchmark for Act 3, which, historically Act 3 in the city of Baldur's Gate has been a massive crunch point for pretty much any PC. But you can see here that, there is clearly a performance advantage running the Linux version, which, it is notable. It is coming out with those parallel lines there, and I'm seeing a 15% performance advantage in favor of the native Linux version over the same version of the game running through Proton. But the real story here is actually in the frame time graph, where, it is pretty stuttery even still on the Linux version, right? But looking compared to what's happening on Proton, holy crap, we've got some frame times there well in excess of 100 milliseconds, and that's been cleaned up dramatically, compared to the
Night and
Linux
day.
version, which is so, add a frame rate cap to the Linux version, and I think you'll be in even more good shape there. So that's Alex's benchmark that he often wheels out. So the second benchmark that I tried was the benchmark that I used, first of all, when devising some memory testing, and then we converted that into an automated benchmark for our CPU test run. But I'm doing things manually here. So this is another part of the city from Act 3 in Baldur's Gate 3. Quite a bit more challenging, I'd say. There is actually a frame rate advantage, obviously, to the Linux version here. But I think the big thing, again, is just that the frame times are just totally disastrous. I've actually got a range of 0 to 160 milliseconds, and that doesn't fully
not
contain
enough.
all of the
Yeah, I see
stuttering
that.
there.
Wow, it's horrible.
There is a 10% performance advantage, but it's not really about the actual frame rates here. It really is about the fact that it's far, far more consistent on the native Linux version there. So this is really, really awesome, right? I mean, I didn't quite expect to see. The frame rate advantage, possibly because you're no longer going through the Proton compatibility layer, but the fact that so much of the stuttering is mitigated here, this is pretty awesome. And I would say that it makes the whole experience of playing Baldur's Gate 3 on a Steam Deck in what is the most demanding area, actually pretty good.
And I think that's the very important key to note there, right, Rich? Like, this city is the demanding area, and the rest of the game runs a lot better. So I'm curious, did you actually see how it runs outside of the city?
Well, limited testing time, but obviously it's a case of, let's go and look for the CPU limited bits and see just how bad or good it is. And, wow, what can I say? I mean, this is really, really good work. So kudos to Larian.
Conversely, though.
Yes, let's talk about Kronos because this one is weird. Now, it's basically a game of two halves when we're looking at this. What can I say? We can add that to the what can I say mega mix that's doing the rounds at the moment. Yes. In a GPU limited situation, we're using the initial sort of cutscene from the beginning of the game here. There's no real difference between the Proton version and the Linux version, which kind of makes sense, I think. Ultimately, it's going to be just delivering the same instructions to the GPU, and it's the same driver, so it kind of makes sense. What's weird here, though, is that once we actually move outside of that cutscene, how can I say this? The Proton version runs significantly better than the native Linux version, which doesn't make sense to me. There's a clear performance advantage here, and I have that to, basically the Proton version 18% faster, but that's actually doing it a disservice, because whenever you're hitting the 60 FPS cap, then obviously the Proton version is being throttled, so to speak, by VSync. So I don't quite understand how the native version, which bypasses the Proton compatibility layer, which does have a CPU overhead, is actually producing worse results. And this is one of those things that I really hate with Digital Foundry testing, is that when you get a result that just doesn't make sense whatsoever, you instantly think, well, actually, that surely the fault can't be of the game. It's got to be my fault. I've done something wrong in the testing. So I actually ran this one 3 times, but I got identical results each time. So I don't quite understand what's going on here. The Linux version that you're seeing on the left there is the default one that will appear, that will be installed if you run Kronos.
One comment I want to throw in here, Rich, and I'm curious if you can explain it. I noticed that all the UI elements in HUD are much sharper on the Linux native version versus the Proton side, right?
Right.
And I'm wondering, is there something going on in terms of resolution, or like the front buffer versus back buffer and all that? Like, just the fact that there is a difference at all makes me wonder about what we're seeing here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm curious about that as well. But what can I say? Maybe it's simply the case that it's tuned to the Steam Deck in that regard, and maybe the Proton version isn't. I'm not sure, but that's an interesting thing that you've pointed out there. I mean, it is the same settings, 720p, very low, no upscaling being used.
The image quality in general, to my eyes, looks slightly better on the Linux version. Like the edges are less, like they're just sharper in general, not as blurry. So I'm wondering
if there is. Maybe there is some sort of configuration difference in there. I'm not quite sure.
Right, because you definitely match the settings, but like right when he comes up to the green door, for instance, and you can see him side by side, you can look at the buckle on his arm, on her arm, and like around the helmet area. It's much cleaner on the Linux side.
Right. Okay, interesting. So, it could be a GPU difference then. I mean, these were the same. Here's the thing, right? The way I did it was to basically run the game, first of all, with the native version, which is, the default, so to speak. And then you sort of swap around the compatibility thing on the Steam front end, and then reload it, and the settings remain the same.
Right.
And so it should be the same, but there does seem to be some sort of lower resolution thing going on the right hand side, which may explain it. I have to do. You're making me do another recheck here, John.
Apologies, Rich.
Yeah, let's just make it 4 times. Just why not? maybe that is the case, but I don't know. Very, very strange. There is a difference between the native version and the standard version in terms of options. It's only a small change as far as I could see, but XeSS is supported on the Proton side, but it's not supported on native Linux, which is probably an XeSS thing rather than anything to do with the developer. But ultimately, 2 different games, 2 different results, and I think Baldur's Gate probably the more impactful one, bearing in mind what they've done here in terms of actually making for an improved experience, and secondly, just the fact that I just love this story of one guy within Larian who really wanted to play Steam Deck a lot more smoothly, play his own game more smoothly on Steam Deck, and actually put the effort in to make it happen.
I'm surprised that a developer on a game like that wants to play his own game, to be honest.
Just going back to the Kronos thing, though, John, I'm just thinking of those first 2 clips where actually the performance is identical.
Ah,
It's weird.
interesting.
It's weird, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
very,
yeah,
very
yeah.
weird. Something's going on there that isn't quite right. But who knows? Any thoughts, Oliver?
I mean, it's bizarre. The performance is like literally, like almost literally to the frame identical. That is very strange, and it's just something's going on maybe which we don't understand. Now, this testing, I'd be curious to see if the testing, not to create any more work for Rich, of course, I would hate to do that, but if it would be any different on low settings, which is a more substantial, the UE5 feature set is totally there. Looks much more like itself on low settings. The game is really stripped back visually, much more like the Switch 2 version.
What, low or very low?
Or rather very low. Sorry, the names are slightly confusing. But I think in general, like with titles like Kronos, with titles like Baldur's Gate 3, perhaps at least in more demanding areas, the issue is like less the lack of native versions, because I think Proton is very good and very performant, especially when you're not dealing with like ray tracing and stuff like that. And it has relatively low overhead. I think the issue is just like the Steam Deck hardware, even though it puts in Herculean efforts, it is fairly weak. It has a fairly weak GPU. It has a fairly weak CPU. It doesn't have a ton of memory bandwidth. Obviously, it doesn't have these nice features that we talk about a little bit here with the more advanced AI upscaling and whatnot. But it is also just generally not a very performant piece of kit. And there's a level at which games don't scale. And I kind of feel like, for me at least, Kronos is past the point at which I'd want to scale games on the Steam Deck. It's still a very interesting exercise. Baldur's Gate 3 is maybe a bit more of a Steam Deck title, but obviously in that Act 3 Baldur's Gate area, it is super, super heavy. And it is super unfavorable to almost any piece of like Zen 2 based hardware you can throw at it. It's just not a very clean experience. But at least, in this case, it is improving the Baldur's Gate 3 situation a little bit, but much less so, obviously, with Kronos.